Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Flannery, and I'll be your worship associate this morning. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Honolulu on this beautifully gray and wet December morning. It is a winter morning. This is winter in Hawaii, isn't it? Our community is inspired by shared principles and a mission to boldly grow compassion, justice, and joy. Our faith draws on many religious sources, welcoming people with different beliefs. We are united by shared values, not by creed or dogma. You are welcome in this place. Please just take a moment to silence your phone if you haven't already done so. And before you do, feel free to check in on your preferred social media to let all of your friends know you are attending a deep and meaningful worship service. We are a growing and very busy community, so please read the announcements in our newsletter, on the website, and printed in the insert on your order of service this morning. I have one particular announcement for all of you, for anyone attending the very exciting festivities this evening. Just a housekeeping note about parking. Please park at the Nuuanu Congregational Church for tonight. And I'm sure Jonipher can answer where that is if anyone needs to know. And if I could invite Lou and Zaf up to help me light the chalice. You guys can come up. And as they light the chalice, please join me in saying, we light this chalice with the embers of compassion. We light this chalice with the torch of justice. We light this chalice with the radiance of joy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Katie, and I spend most of my time upstairs lately. There we go. Is that better?
That's better.
All right. Upstairs with the 3 to 6 youth group. And so I get to do the story for all ages today. I'm very honored. So hello, all ages. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the story and then have a couple other things to add. So this story is all with your imaginations. There's no pictures today, so you have to really think. Once upon a time, there was a wise man who used to go to the ocean to do his writing. He had a habit of walking on the beach as he began his work. One day he was walking along the shore, and he looked down the beach, and he saw a human figure like a dancer. He smiled at the thought of someone who would dance to the day, and so he walked faster to catch up. As he got closer, he noticed that the figure was that of a young man, and that what he was doing was not dancing at all. The young man was reaching down on the shore, picking up small objects and throwing them into the ocean. He came closer still, and he called out, "Good morning. May I ask what you are doing?" And the young man paused, looked up, and replied, "I'm throwing starfish into the ocean." "I must ask then, why are you throwing these starfish into the ocean?" asked the startled wise man. To this, the young man replied, "The sun is up and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them into the ocean, they will die." And upon hearing this, the wise man commented, "But young man, do you not realize there are miles and miles of starfish all along every mile? You can't possibly make a difference." At this, the young man reached down, picked up yet another starfish, and threw it into the ocean. And as it met the water, he said, "It made a difference for that one." All right. So I'm sure some of you have heard that story before, but I think it makes a good point today, which is that we can all make a difference, even if it's just one little thing. And so RE, 2 weeks ago, decided that they wanted to adopt a family with Helping Hands Hawaii. And so we've adopted 2 families. And what did we do last week? We colored coats. And we colored coats. And so if everybody can look back there on that little tree, it's a tree of giving. And on that are little coats that all the children have made with actual people's names who actually live in Hawaii. And they are probably, I don't want to, put a hierarchy on lives, but maybe more important than a starfish. They're actually here. And so some of their wishes, they're very basic. They were like coats and blankets. And as I woke up today, I was like, oh my goodness, a baby needs a sweatshirt and I need a sweater. And I thought, oh, there are people who could really, really use these. So if you're so compelled, feel free to grab a coat, and you can purchase the gift, wrap it or unwrap it, and bring it back by the 21st. If you need more information, come see me. But all of these children are going to be doing just that, okay? And all of the older children, everybody who feels so compelled. So that's our little wee pitch. And as an aside, I just wanted you all to know what we're doing in RE lately. Hold on, guys. Hold on. And so the 3 to 6-year-olds are studying different kinds of families today. The slightly older children are learning about worship. And the older yet children are practicing loyalty, which is the third of their, virtues. They're third of their virtues. Sorry, I haven't been in that classroom. I'm thinking on a smaller level. So with that, I think we're ready to go upstairs. And thank you so much.
Let's make a bridge and sing our children out. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere,
How many of you, when you read the newsletter and saw that for the whole month of December, we were going to be talking about silence, you were just absolutely thrilled and couldn't get yourself to church in the morning? Show of hands. Well, there were a few more in the 9:15 service, but that's probably because that's the meditative, silent service that we had. But nonetheless, I know I was thrilled to have a worship about silence, because that would mean I would have very little sermon preparation to do. All I would need to do is stand up here and be silent. That, after all, is how I'd be able to practice what I preach. Yeah? All right, so here we go. Just kidding. Silence, indeed, has had a bad rap, especially in the Western world. After all, what do we associate when we hear the word silence? There's usually an adjective that comes before it, like awkward silence. Ever hear about that? And don't you know that that's part of the reason why whenever you tune into the radio or TV, there's something called dead airspace that you want to avoid as much as possible. And so it seems that we human beings, the way we lived our lives, often seems to mirror that. That in our conversations, we dread the lull in the conversation. And we dread whenever there's a pause or whenever there's a moment of silence that enters into our dialogue. And what's the second reason why silence has such a negative bad rap in our society? Ever notice that when someone gets mad at you, they give you what? The silent treatment. That's when you know, ooh, you're really in trouble. Because they're not even yelling at you, they're not even using words to describe how they feel, they're using the deadly weapon of silence. I'm sure none of us have ever received a silent treatment from our loved ones, ever, right? And there's a third element to it, actually, and it was described by this group called Simon and Garfunkel. I'm not going to date you to raise your hand to see if you've ever heard of this group or not, this singing duo. But back in the 70s, this is actually where I stole the title of the sermon from, Echoing the Sound of Silence. They wrote a song called The Sound of Silence. And here's a couple of verses from that song. And in the naked light I saw, no, I'm not going to sing it, Margaret. In the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking. People hearing without listening. People writing songs that voices never share. And no one dared disturb the sound of silence. Fool, said I, you do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach you. But my words, like silent raindrops, fell and echoed in the well of silence. Powerful words. And I kid you not, there's so many websites out there that try to interpret what Simon and Garfunkel mean by this vision. And sometimes whenever I hear that silence like cancer grows, it has such a negative connotation. As if the worst nightmare that one could have is people talking without speaking and hearing without listening, as the words to the song says. And so what does it mean for us to be so disturbed by silence? And I know the extroverts in the room are probably saying, yeah, who cares about silence? Who gives, I could use without silence all day long. Is there any value to silence at all? And what is the meaning of silence in a spiritual context anyway? Well, years ago when I was in seminary, I was taking a class on nonviolent communication and conflict transformation. And I found out from that class that over 90% of how we communicate with each other is nonverbal. So just the raising of an eyebrow, for example, could have many different connotations to it, could it not? And silence itself could be filled with so many meanings and so many different emotions. So it's not just anger when we're silent, but sometimes we are so shocked that that induces us to silence. Or we are in such awe and wonder of the beauty that surrounds us that we are silent about it. Ever notice that? There's a gazillion other emotions that are associated with silence, but two in particular come to mind. One is we become silent whenever we are struck with something so huge and profound and revelatory. Is that the right word? Revelational? I don't know. You know what I mean, right? Whenever we're in such, whenever we are experiencing such wonder in our lives, we are reduced to silence. So in India, how they used to hold these theological debates is that one side would say what they believe in and the nature of God or Brahman or Atman or whatever it is that they talk about, and then they would sit down. The other person would give their monologue about their views and their philosophies of the cosmos and the world, and they would sit down. And then both of them would get up and they would talk at each other and have a debate going on, yeah? Now, the way they gauge the winner of that debate is whether or not one of them is able to induce the crowd and the audience into silence. Isn't that a great way of finding out, whether something rings true and echoes in deep within your soul or not? Is whether you can actually be reduced to silence? And I believe that our society these days live in a constant soundtrack of noise. We hear wah, wah, wah all around us, that we rarely have an opportunity to set aside time for silence. What might we find out if we were to cut through the noise? This is what Chris and I thought about during the 13 hours of debate that went on in the House auditorium on November 8th. As we were listening to one wah, wah, wah over the other, and then not to mention that wah, wah, wah going on outside with people yelling, let the people vote, let the people vote, let the people vote. By the end of the evening, as each of the representatives stood up to give their final speech as to why they supported or not supported marriage equality, I wanted to hear every single one of them. And I wanted so badly for there to be silence right outside, so that I could have that moment of pausing and reflecting and finding out if there's a gem to what they're about to say, and if I could be transformed even by those whose opinions I do not share. Can there be a moment when we could come together and deeply and truly listen to each other? And can that moment happen without the sound of silence? I think not. I think not. And besides, silence is valued in so many cultures other than Western culture. I was Googling, for example, Japanese culture and Japanese etiquette. And guess what? There was a whole big section in there about silence. It says when a Japanese person is silent, don't rush in to fill it in with words. Don't start a conversation right away, but rather sit with the silence for a little bit. And I tell you what, this really is not according to my culture either, because I'm Chinese. And any of you been to a Chinese restaurant? A silent Chinese restaurant is an anathema. It's a paradox, it's an oxymoron, it just doesn't exist, all right? Whenever we talk to each other, it's always, and everybody would speak as loudly as possible to each other. In fact, Chris could attest to this. When he first met me 15 years ago, he thought, well, is your dad upset? You know, why is he yelling? And I'm like, no, he's just saying, hi, how are you? That's just the way we talk. You know, we don't observe silence very often. It's just about the way we interact with each other. But yet, in certain cultures, silence is actually revered and it's valued as something that would enable us to more freely communicate with one another. And so, over the years, I have grown to appreciate silence. At first, by accident. So a few years ago, when I was in seminary, I was taking a summer school class in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I decided to look up a few places that would be fairly reasonable so that this starving seminary student could afford it. And I didn't do much research as to what this place would be like, but it ended up being St. John the Evangelist Monastery. That's what I get for being popular. I should have stayed at a regular hotel, but no, because it was only $60 a night, which is cheap for Cambridge, I decided to book myself in this monastery. And so when I was checking in, I was talking to, I forgot what the brother's name was, but I was talking to this monk, and he said, well, you do know that this is a silent monastery, do you not? And I said, you mean I can't talk on a cell phone? No. You mean I can't talk and have a conversation even when we're eating? No. It's a silent monastery. And so you can imagine how I was just counting down the days of, oh my gosh, thankfully I'm only here for a week. I could not go through life being silent all the time. But believe it or not, something miraculous started happening as I began to engage with silence. I found myself actually being able to pick up on that still small voice a lot more than I used to be able to. And I was able to be still and be present in that moment. And all of a sudden, the stuff I was learning in school, I was able to absorb much quicker. And I was able to walk through life much more centered. And the words that came out of my mouth were much more articulate and eloquent. And I ended up getting an A in that class, thanks to the silent monastery that I enrolled myself in. And so when I came back to the real world, I decided, I think I am ready to attend a Quaker meeting. Where they're, yeah, ooh, that's a big undertaking, yeah? 45 whole minutes of silence at this Quaker meeting in Manoa. And I tell you what, like some other people, you know, during that long period of silence, I started coughing in the middle. It's just gonna be over. Or I started thinking to myself, please, someone be moved by the Spirit already and talk. Anything, say anything. And no one did for 45 whole minutes. But yet again, I found out that when the silence was finally broken, people were saying things that were so deep and profound and deeply spiritual that I found myself saying, wow, that was a valuable 45 minutes of silence. What's been your experience with silence? Do you go by the strict literal definition of silence, which is the absence of sound? And it's also interesting how in Western society, absence is represented with a circle, yeah? And that's zero in Western society, or nothing, null, void. But in Indian culture, the circle actually means completeness and wholeness and totality. What a drastic difference from zero to wholeness and totality and fullness. And what if we were to view silence that way? That it's really not an empty time in our lives, but what about pregnant pauses? How about the fact that silence is very fertile and fecund? Is that the word I'm saying? Fecund? Fecund? I don't know. It's all English to me. So what if we were to view it that way? That there's such fullness whenever we engage with silence. That when we're listening to the echoing of spirit, of that still small voice, that we would then be able to echo it back, not just within us, but throughout our world, as that echoing the sound of silence as compassion and peace and joy and justice. What if that were to be the echoing of the sound of silence? Well, believe it or not, we have a hymn called Find the Stillness. And it goes, find the stillness, hold the stillness, let the stillness carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit, giving power, I will find true harmony. What if we can only find harmony in the midst of the harriedness of our lives, in the midst of the suffering that goes on in our world, in the midst of the violence, in the midst of whatever it is that ails our world, that what if we find that we could only echo the sound of silence, and that would bring about transformation? Wouldn't that be a spiritual practice worth engaging in? So as we go forth from here, and as we go forth and deal with the madness and craziness of the holiday season, I pray that we will all be able to just be still and find the depths of our silence. May it be so.